Today we're going to look at what an analysis is and how you might go about doing it. So the important thing to know is you need to know what the writer is actually saying, what their comment is about a particular issue or problem. It usually is a criticism or a condemnation, or they could be justifying a particular point of view, and it's not necessarily the exact words written in the piece. You need to work out what they're implying. And then you determine what they're using to imply or say this, and how they say it, where they say it, and why they say it. The last thing you need to talk about is what is their intended effect on the audience. And when we talk about the audience, you can't just call them the audience. You need to work out who exactly they are, what particular group are they, and what are they being asked to think, feel, say, or do. Because the writer specifically makes choices with what words are used, or with which particular pictures are used, or statistics, or anything like that, because with that they try to influence that particular audience member in a certain way. So it's really important that you look at these types of questions about what analysis is, and if you're not answering a question or saying something that's similar to what is on this particular list, you won't actually be writing an analysis. So just putting the quotes in or saying that they've used this particular word isn't enough. That goes a little bit similar to listing persuasive techniques. They may have used 10 rhetorical questions, but if that's all you're going to tell me or your examiner, that's actually not enough. It's not necessarily they've used the rhetorical question. It is what actually is in the rhetorical question, so what language is in there. And we use the example that you guys say all the time, or your parents might say if you're trying to ask them for certain things, and you say, do you really want me to starve? It's not that they've asked a rhetorical question, it's that you're trying to make someone feel guilty when you ask that particular question, and that's what you should be talking about. So that's really important. So here we're going to go looking at a particular rhetorical question with a parent who has asked a child who's left Lego all over the floor, why do you always do this? They actually don't want an answer. They don't want to be told, I do this to annoy you, or I do this because I hate you, or I do this because I can't be bothered picking up my Lego. They do this. The parent asked that question really is just to say, I feel disrespected by you. I feel that you're being lazy or disorganised or something like that, and I want you to fix this. And the idea is that the child would then feel guilty that they're making the parent's life a bit of a misery, and they'll change their behaviour. That is why that question is asked. Once again, if you look at statistics, you don't say, oh, they've, quoted this particular statistic or they've used this particular statistic. It's often where that statistic is from, because the author has deliberately chosen to use that particular number from that particular source for a reason. If they're using, and the example here is a medical danger, they're going to use the source of some sort that has some sort of medical credibility. If I was quoting something else, for example, looking at the immunisation arguments, I'm not going to be quoting from an anti-immunisation source. I might be quoting from a particular doctor or someone who's talking about how many people have been affected by a disease, because my aim is to make you want to immunise. If my aim was to make you not want to immunise, I might start quoting from how many people have actually been affected by immunisations, and I choose that data as opposed to the data that shows you how many people have been saved. So it's really important that you look at not just what the statistic is, but what exactly is said by it, what is implied by that particular statistic. And we've got an example here, and it was straight after Trump won the election in America, and people were using all sorts of statistics to prove that he had the majority vote. But what they were doing was ignoring other numbers. And when you do that, you're actually trying to imply something, that he has more of the vote than maybe he did, and that's how they convince you of their opinion. So a lot of you have been taught introductions cap padded, and now when you're looking at other things, you're like, oh no, now we're learning something different, it's all different, I don't know what to do. But in reality, it's probably something quite similar. But cap padded, it's quite good in some of those lower levels, but as you get to year 12, it doesn't push you enough for where you need to be. And sometimes it causes you to use words which were fine in lower levels, but then we would say that it was a little bit unsophisticated. So if you look at the contention, audience, title, publication, author, tone, issue, and text type, that's okay. But really, you need to be thinking about not just the audience, but you need to be as detailed and specific as possible. So the smallest subgroup that can be determined, explain who they are, what they're being asked to think, feel, say or do. It's not just the type of text, because you're looking at persuasive text, but it's the form of that. Is it a persuasive speech? Is it a persuasive letter? Is it a persuasive essay? Is it an opinion piece? Is it an editorial? What exactly is the form of this text you're looking at? And then you've got purpose, persona and premise. So purpose and premise are a little bit different. So the purpose is actually what they're intending for the audience to think, feel, say or do. But the premise is why they wrote it in the first place. So they may have been annoyed about a particular thing and they've decided to respond to that. And that's also the case when you're looking at a comparative, because the second text is sometimes a response to the first text. So you need to actually talk about the relationship between the two. So if we look at the 5 main steps of an introduction: the issue and its timeline, why the text was written, the textual details, the audience and the relevance of the text, what action they're asked to take, who is portrayed and why, the author's overall ideology, persona they put across, their bias, their roles, and the layers of the contention, the idea actually has been put forward. If you go back to Cat Paddock, that's all there. But instead of saying the first thing you talk about is contention, then audience, then title, actually if you look at Cat Paddock, title, publication, author, text type and sometimes issue can be done in one sentence. And so really when you look at the 5 steps here, it actually pushes you to talk about a few different things. But they're all listed in Cat Paddock. It's just making you see the depth that's required as opposed to seeing them as little lists. So you've got to keep thinking about those, keep thinking that analysis really is what, where, why, how. Sometimes it's who. So it's what's the idea, and if it's who or what is portrayed. Where are they portrayed? Why are they portrayed in this way? How does this impact people? So if you're not answering a who, what, where or why, who, what, where, why, how question, you're not analysing properly. So your what sentence is what we used to call the topic sentence, and you could still call it the topic sentence if you want to, but to make sure you're writing the correct type of thing, you might say, am I writing a sentence that tells me what the idea is, what the author is doing, who or what is described, question, portrayed, and what does the author want the audience to do? Then you're not giving the right information. The where information is where is this idea, portrayal, description suggested or situated in the text, and what example suggests it, and possibly how that example suggests it. Why is this description, this idea, this portrayal done? Why is this language used? How does it support the contention? How does the audience react to this particular use of the word? And lastly, how does the discussion in the paragraph support the contention, argument suggested in the introduction? How is the point building on the argument developed by the author? And the last one, how does this particular word make the audience angry, aggressive, annoyed, anything like that? So how does it actually impact the audience? When you're writing your what sentence, a really simple pattern is the 4-step pattern: author, verb, topic, message. Davy White says toast is delicious. Too many of you just sort of say Davy White is talking about toast, but you don't say what the actual opinion of that topic is. Now that 4-step process is a really basic process for writing a what sentence, and from there you would try and find better verbs, and then from that better verbs position that you're in, you might choose to normalize the verbs and turn them into nouns and write a more sophisticated sentence from there. But at a simple point, you are writing a simple 4-step pattern for a what sentence. And now we have an example here. Under the pretense of democracy, we allow ourselves to be tricked into thinking we have a say. We look towards Canberra, ever hopeful that one day these people will speak for us and not cause damage in our name. Instead, Canberra, once a bastion of moral choice, has become a magical fairyland full of hideous pixies who seek to torment the damned. Why do we let these minions of Satan continue to rule over our lives? They are making more and more corrupt decisions, and it needs to stop. So imagine that was written somewhere, and that's what you were required to analyse as part of your SAC. So we're saying the author is a person called Smith, and Smith portrays Parliament as having the possibility for change that is only marred by the politicians who work there. So if you go back to the text, you'll notice those words are never written in the text, but that is a summary of what Smith is actually saying, that Canberra and the and Parliament is corrupt, there's problems there, and that if they would make some change, we would have a better system. We're going to pretend that Smith is a lady. Her description of the government facility as a magical fairyland full of hideous pixies serves to mock the role politicians have in our country. So you can see how that grey area begins the analysis, hinting at the way the audience interprets the quote, while still stating what the writer has done and where it was done. And then you might go into why and how. Smith's caustic ridicule of the way in which our government is intended to belittle the decisions made by politicians and urged Australian voters to rise up against the laws made by this group. She implies that the senators are mischievous and malevolent beings whose sole aim is to wreak havoc on the Australian people, and they really can't be trusted. Smith's lack of trust in the government is evident. Her desire to have them voted out at the upcoming election culminates in this final description. Her continued and ferocious attempts to reduce the standing they have in the voting public further highlights the anger she has regarding the decisions of the government has made about the proposed taxation laws. Smith's targeted attack heightens the anger the tax-paying public has towards the government and further incites them to action against the government's decisions. So there's a few things highlighted there, and a lot of them, especially in the light blue we underlined, is the tone that's actually being used there. So rather than saying it's she's used a ferocious tone, we might say it's a ferocious attempt, or we could say it's a target attack, it's a accusatory attack. So we actually start using our words and changing the parts of speech they are, whether they're a verb or a noun or an adjective. So we can actually sort of talk about the tone there as well. And you can see that simple what, where, why, how pattern in that basic paragraph sample. All right, a second example is below, and it talks about the persuasive technique rhetorical question. So we've got that there. Why do we let these minions of Satan continue to rule over our lives? It's important that you don't just talk about this being a rhetorical question. It's the fact that there's some really powerful language in there, minions of Satan, suggesting that they're actually being ruled by Satan and that they are doing his bidding, and that's who and what our government is. So you need to be talking about that aspect of that particular quote as opposed to saying it's a rhetorical question. And you can find other words that describe what the question actually is as opposed to being a question. Is that we're telling someone off here? We're criticising Australia's behaviour. We're scolding them. We're reprimanding them. So you actually look at, is this actually a telling off? Is this a suggestion, this question? What is the idea presented there, and find a word that best describes that. So here we've got a discussion or an analysis of that particular rhetorical question. Smith continues to berate the Australian voters' complacent manner and refusal to push the government for change. She likens the politicians to little more than servants who have been given too much power, and this situation needs to be rectified. Her sardonic questioning of the public's ability to be ruled by minions of Satan highlights the power she believes Australians have relinquished and she feels should be fought for. This rebuke has an applied answer that the Australian public should no longer accept the rules and regulations made by the government. So you can see some of the words that we've talked about in the previous slide used in the analysis here. And the last one there, Smith's intent is to tar the governing body to such a degree they'll not be voted for in July. And so once again, that's talking about how that whole description is intended to impact the audience. This next slide is looking at when you're actually making your planning and you talk about how many ideas are in the suggested text. So rather than get a quote and talk about the ideas of that quote and then get another quote and talk about the ideas in that quote, you actually determine what are those main ideas that the author is actually coming up with, and then find all the quotes and examples that actually talk about those main ideas. And you plan it that way using that what, where, why, how method. And the other podcast actually has that demonstrated in that sort of ripple box activity. Then obviously if you can summarise those 5 ideas into one, that would be really what the global contention is, the main idea that will be discussed in your introduction. Okay, hopefully that has helped you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.